Hello, everybody, and welcome to Wickersoft's webcast. We have a great topic for you today. We're going to be talking about enterprise program and portfolio management in Project Online. My name is Michael Tronto, and I'm a strategic account specialist at Wickersoft. I'm also joined today with Scott Daly, who leads as an account executive role and a project portfolio management specialist. As always, the line will not be open for questions, but feel free to use the chat feature. Anything we don't get to, we will respond to via email, and we will be including our contact information at the end of the webinar. Please keep in mind that all of our content, all of our webinars are uploaded to our YouTube channel, and if you subscribe there, you will get our webinars instantly as they're published. I will now hand off the webinar to Scott Daly. Scott?
Thanks, Mike. As you can see, it says that this webinar was made to be presented by Jim Patterson. If there's anything that is disreputable or unlikable about this webinar, then it was Jim Patterson that did the presentation. Anything that you like about it, it was me, Scott Daly. Thank you for introducing me, Mike. We're going to, this will probably take in the neighborhood of half an hour, maybe slightly more. We're going to show some slides, then we're going to show some demo. In a normal, or I shouldn't say normal, but if you turn around and there's something that really interests you in this and you want a proper presentation, we're very happy to do it. And in that event, usually when people are asking questions and interacting, it ends up taking an hour or more. But in terms of a webinar, we do kind of tend to move right through things. I also want to be sure and say up front, again, that we are going to show some slides, but don't be worried. We're not going to show just slides, and I will get through that and actually get to the demo. So we're going to talk a little bit about portfolio management concepts. I assume this is going to be remedial for some people, but sometimes we actually end up saying things that surprise me because there's always new people in our industry. Portfolio and program management and Project Online. We are actually talking heavily about Project Online. That's where we're going to be demoing. And then we'll go through a quick summary and a wrap up. So project and portfolio management concepts. Over the course of let's say the last 50 years, certainly going back to before there was Amazon, but not as far back as before there was Woolworths. The notion, the concepts around technology have changed, even though probably the basic project and portfolio management concepts themselves haven't. The fact that we can use technology to do things easily now alters the expectations of our communities and the way we expect things to get done. At a very basic level, it was not possible. Let's be safe and say 60, 70 years ago, to do a Gantt chart that was automated. Everything that had to be done had to be redone by hand. But now that we kind of accelerate forward to today, people expect a lot more than that. They expect to be able to interact through their mobile device. They expect to come into an environment that is tailored to them and that they can understand immediately, and that maybe isn't all about what the project manager needs or wants to show people. So there's generally been an expansion in what people's expectations are of technology from an ease of use standpoint, which is an easy catch-all because people still want it to do different things. And what we find is that this really amounts to more making sure that each person that interacts with the central product interacts in a way that makes sense to them individually, rather than trying to say that the product itself is not complicated. They are, if anything, much more complicated than they originally were. The other thing that's been certainly has been omnipresent throughout the history of corporate organizations, but has become much more visible and pronounced in, say, the last 10 to 20 years, is that there are different kinds of work management. And by that, what we really mean is that there are different kinds of planning and reporting on activities against those plans, and they're all valid. They may not, in fact, be the same process. And so one of the ways to think about it is you may go through an annual budgeting process or a capital budgeting cycle or something else where you have a list of projects that you could do or might do, and and a list of other things that you could spend money on that aren't even projects, that you then want to kind of plan out at a very high level and say, look, I'm in Q1, I think I'm going to spend this much on labor, and I'm going to spend this much on capital investments, and in Q2 I'm going to spend this much. But you don't want to do a WBS for that. You don't have that level of detail available. You're really just trying to lay down budgets that are going to make sense for your corporation. That's a completely valid level of planning that exists independently of what we often think of in project management as WBS style planning. And at a layer below that, you might go into saying things about portfolio and program management. What are the objectives for a particular portfolio or program? How do we want to approach this and measure our success in this? Which projects do we think might be in this or might not be in this? And down below that, you then would have things like what WBS-based planning or what they call resource capacity planning, both of which we'll look at a little bit, although not in a huge amount of depth in this webinar. But the point to take from this, what you see in a lot of companies is an attempt to consolidate this all into a single plan, and that's great. What that does is ignore the fact that each one of these planning tracks is valid and actually needs to be rationalized against each of the other planning types. What needs to not happen is kind of a belief that somehow one of these planning types is better or worse than any other. They're just different. They approach each one of the topics that is, controlling and shaping the future differently through a different set of mechanics. And what you want is a system that somehow unifies this and at least makes obvious, look, these are the discrepancies between our different planning tracks. How are we going to resolve them? Enterprise portfolio management lifecycle. I don't think that this is necessarily a difficult concept, but just to cover it really quickly, you have starts of a planning cycle. A lot of times what you see in portfolio management systems right away is kind of an elimination of project or elimination of non-project spend. We here at Wickersoft don't believe that's the right way to go. You also tend to see sometimes an elimination of non-waterfall spend. You tend to want to see agile methodologies bundled off into a separate thing. We also don't agree with that. The cycle, though, remains the same. You have a planning cycle. Be it your annual planning cycle, be it your quarterly planning cycle, being at the start of a project. But you need to go through and then in some way conduct your high-level enterprise modeling and define your basic targets. You want to push your targets down to an actionable level, and all of this can be done and handled in Portfolio Online. You want to push these targets down to an actionable level. Now, what does that mean? That takes a lot of different forms these days, and that is a useful and good thing. So not just a typical project Gantt chart schedule, but you might use Office Planner. You might use something as as basic as Wunderlist, and you might then turn around and need to fill it back into various agile focused tools like Visual Studio or Jira, and then you want to actually walk back through, validate those plans against what you set out at your targeting cycle, figure out what we need to do to consolidate that, and then end the planning cycle. In all these cases, again, we used to kind of see in the past that people would try to claim the primacy of one form of planning over another. And again, in the last 10 years, we think there's been a general acknowledgement that what you need to do is support each kind of planning and support the comparison between the results of each kind of plan, and then, of course, track against those results, against those plans. And we think it can all be done inside Project Online, which will surprise some people, but we've had good success with that. Providing the right tool for the right job, exactly what we were talking about. Once you kind of work through this, we think that it is good to stick with what you have. So in some places, you see that Jira is very successful and entrenched. When we talk about portfolio and program management, we don't start with the premise, oh, that Jira needs to go, or that somehow Jira is secondary to Project Online or to Gantt charts. It is a first-class citizen that just needs to be plugged into the overall planning cycle. Portfolio Online with project execution, again, basic. So we're going through strategic themes. How do we consolidate all this in one place? We will show some of that in the demo. We won't go into the depths of how the mechanics of it work. Suffice it to say that Wickersoft does make a connector that enables you to do all this without having to go through a lot of grief and a lot of mechanics. The nice thing about working in Project Online in a lot of cases is that you're leveraging what you already own. Project Online also is very price competitive on a per seat cost. Project usually doesn't lose on price if it's a competitive situation. And of course, a lot of times, being that it's built on SharePoint itself, it plugs right into what exists in a lot of enterprise environments already. The outcomes amount to comprehensive reporting and visibility. That alone actually is a great thing. Stopping the kind of madness around wondering what's going on in which disparate system and not having a way to consolidate that is really a huge win, even without delivering any results out of it, because suddenly people can start to ask the kinds of questions and seek the kind of answers that they really want but maybe don't know about. Decentralized contribution, of course, we are not talking about displacing people from systems they like. Streamlined collaboration across roles, very big deal. Anybody that's tried to work in an environment where there are agile teams working on sprints and trying to get that data to register on the executives' expectations that they will get things done at certain times on certain budgets is aware that collaboration is really important. And then, of course, we want to put people in a position where they're happy about participating and that they're not constantly talking about, oh, we do it differently. So what does it look like? And we're getting close to the demo now. I'm just going to kind of preview some of what we're going to see. We're able to capture business demand. So we have various means of capturing intake for project suggestions for large programs, small programs. Not only that, but of course, ticketing systems and everything else if we need to get to that level of sophistication. Conducting of high-level portfolio planning. Again, this means many things to many different people. We're going to talk a little bit about a couple different styles during the demo. But in the end, what you are attempting to do is pull together the various mechanisms for planning and come up with an overall vision without forcing anybody to back into a planning mechanism that they don't think suits them. Adding efficiency to capital budgeting. A lot of times capital budgeting as a process is spread out across a lot of different spreadsheets. It becomes an ad hoc tool that needs to be rebuilt every year. We provide a mechanism for not only structuring that data and structuring that process, but for, again, being able to put you in a position to compare what the project schedulers are saying and thinking is going to happen versus what the actual budget was. Intuitive performance review reports. So how are we progressing in environments where it's important to compare results to what was actually planned, which is surprisingly the value of planning is often 90% in the act of planning itself, more than measuring the results against it. But your subsequent planning will be improved if you're willing to take the steps to measure against plan. But it's not every environment does this, but for those that do, we also kind of provide a mechanism for dashboarding those results and making sure that not only can people put their track against the plan, put their actual time in, but that the executives who are wanting to see things in a certain way with a certain level of, let's say, beauty are able to do that as well. Finally, once all this information is gathered in a place, we are able to look at this in a huge number of different visualizations that can be suggested or offered for what the particular business question is that needs to be answered. And we've already talked about that. Intuitive user interface. I think the most important thing out of this is not necessarily how great the interface is of just project, but the fact that we're not going to demand that people shift from one environment to the next. Okay. So I'm going to shift into the demo now, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we achieve some of these things with Project Online. I don't know how many people on the call, of course, are familiar with Project Online. If we do a personal demo, that's one of the first things we'll ask is, what do we need to explain about how project works and how deeply do we need to go into certain things. But for the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to gloss over this and assume that most people are at least semi-familiar with what they're looking at. You can see you've got a timeline across the top. You've got various projects and or initiatives in various states, requested, approved, in progress. You have various graphical indicators, of course, all customizable. And then you have a top-level Gantt chart. Now, this is an environment that we would expect the PMO to work in. It doesn't mean that we think that the PMO needs to live here necessarily, and we don't necessarily think that executives would live in this environment. We will kind of show the dashboarding in a little bit. But this is an environment that's very easy to assemble and to configure, and has really proven its durability over time. Maybe not because it's the most modern piece of this, but certainly because it does what it's supposed to do very effectively, and we find that clients can change it in any way they want in order to get what they want out of it. So ideas and requests. What you're going to see in this environment as well is a very configured project online environment. Not everything you see is there when you open the box, or out of the box, but this is all within the bounds of what can be configured. In this case, project requests come in. We have, just for the purposes of demo, classified each of these requests in terms of states for the request. A new item is a simple matter of a form, title, details, project type. You're able to approach this in the prioritization of these requests in whatever way you wish. That's all customizable. You're able to then also, if you wish, do benefits analysis. That is, describe what the benefit is, link it to a project, put the year, and lay down a time-phased expected amount to deliver. Again, that's customizable. That's just for the purpose of demo. Once you've done that as well, you're able to do this, rate this, star rating, vote rating, have a calculated prioritization score, whatever you need to do to support your particular organization. And this could be delivered on a mobile device as well. So if somebody is in the grocery store and has a brilliant idea for a project request, and you guys want to have a more open innovation system, that is supported as well. Anyway, the short of it is that as this progresses through the stages, according to whatever business logic you think would be valid, once it gets to approved, it can get moved into creating a project. So at this point, I want to come in and let's talk a little bit about what happens in a lot of organizations once you have a project. So you have a list of things that you could work on. And now we're at a stage where we want to say, look, we're not really ready to schedule this project. We're not really ready to invest in creating a WBS. But we do want to have a look ahead over a certain amount of time to say, what do we just think that we're going to spend our money on as this rolls forward? So in this case, we are looking at a particular project, VoIP phones, and we are saying things about what we think might be involved in labor spend at each month. And this, of course, is in the past now, which is why we have some actuals. But each month going out into the future, whatever amount that you think. Now, we actually have some clients that are working on projects that run 20 to 40 years into the future. They are working primarily with this kind of planning tool. You can imagine you're not allowed to construct a lot of detail that far out into the future, but you do still need to budget for it. How they work in particular is for the coming year, they budget on a per month basis, and then in the out years they budget on an annual basis. But the short of it is that they can plan their spend based on the projects that they intend to undertake without having to do a proper project schedule. And this has a lot of good results, right? Obviously, that this is what goes into a lot of corporate planning. And again, to my earlier point, this is a very valid form of planning. It's fast. It's legitimate. It is different from constructing a detailed schedule, but that doesn't matter. It still is something that you want to be able to say and support in your organization, and not treat like it's an unusual cycle. We are able to show things in terms of various currencies. We are able to change the date range. We are able to make comparisons. I'm going to take this away and just do the budget. You are able to make comparisons between forecast, actuals, benefits, things of that nature. And you are able to edit this all right in this grid. So that you are, if you have this cycle, and it does currently sit as a series of disconnected spreadsheets, this could theoretically be a replacement for that particular piece. So I'm going to step back out to the main kind of project page. And how you came into that and how you ask people to interact with that, of course, is all customizable. Again, to the point of you want people who are involved in that process to just look at the projects that they need to look at, and then they can do the planning that they need to go through. Once you've gone through that cycle, or even if you have ignored that cycle, and let's suppose that you would prefer to go through a more portfolio-based planning cycle. So in this environment, you've said, and this sometimes people call these portfolios, sometimes people call these, some people call these programs. It does go back and forth, and it's one of the things that we work with a client right away, is to distinguish between one version of program and another version of program. But let's suppose that you decide that your portfolio has various objectives and has various metrics associated with it. Your portfolio might have a top-line budget. It might have top-line plan benefit. But we're able to support all that and say, okay, great. You've got a complex approach to portfolio management. You want to say things like, here's your portfolio metadata, who's the owner, status, strategic initiative. You want to even possibly have some schedule information. You want to have business case for the portfolio itself, how you're going to come in and do prioritization. You may want to do some limited planning. You may want to have documents associated just with the portfolio. You may want to have risks, changes, status reports, and projects associated with the portfolio as well. Again, sometimes people call this a program, but we're able to do this and centralize this data in Project Online so that you're in a position to maybe eliminate some other systems or file shares that you're working on, consolidate this in one place, and make sure that people are managing this in a way that makes sense. Once we've gone through that, of course, there's the basics of projects, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to pick on my favorite VoIP phones again. There's a lot available at a portfolio and program management level for any one project. You may want to have a stakeholder analysis that includes who it is, what their impact is, are they an influencer? And I'm going to show the kind of output of this in reports very shortly. You may want to track requirements. For those of you who have used a sophisticated requirements tracking tool, and I can think of various examples, this is not it. This is a basic requirements tracking tool, but it is a nice place. It is fully auditable, and you can see exactly who touched what and when they touched it. There are some limits to the amount of cross references you might make, but it does a good job for a basic requirements process. Project benefits, you're able to plan project benefits again over time, and this can come in directly from the ideas and suggestion. Schedule, I think this is a given when you're talking about Project Online. One of the nice things about Project Online is that, of course, for those people that want to exclusively work through a web browser, that is fine. You can edit every schedule. You don't have to open Project Professional. You don't have to have anything on your desktop if you don't want to, but you can if that makes sense. Risks, issues, change requests, the usual kinds of things that you would expect out of a project management system. And then, of course, project site. You're able to take a look at a collaboration environment where every project also has its own documents, where it has a project summary, my action items, my changes, my risks, my issues, my time, my work, newsfeed. This is all customizable as well. It can look like whatever you want to do to support collaboration on a project or on a program. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to say finally about this, but this is maybe one of the more interesting pieces of the kinds of things you see in organizations. Project Online has a concept of resource engagements. And what resource engagements are really are commitments to that a resource manager might make to a particular project or initiative or program. And in a lot of organizations, especially a PMO, they don't own the resources. It's what you frequently see referred to as a matrixed organization. In a matrixed organization, the project schedule probably has resources on it. Certainly Project Online shows resource utilization automatically. Once you put resources on a schedule, it automatically consolidates and rolls them up. But you still see that the resource manager is looking at their particular team of resources, and they are either informally or formally, less often, making plans about what the people on their particular team are going to be doing over the next couple weeks, couple months, doesn't matter. And that planning path as well, again, is entirely legitimate. It's different from what the project manager thinks, for sure, in almost all cases, but it is a legitimate form of planning, and it needs to be compared to ultimately what the project manager thinks. So the short of this is I'm able to come in, see what Amy, for example, is working on at the top level across these projects. I'm also able to click and drag and move these things to other people so that Amy, if she is over capacity, in this case, you can see that she's working 100 hours in 1 week, I'm able to move those items off to other people. I'm also able to look at what we call generic resources. So this is business analyst demand that might be signaled across various projects, but doesn't have a name on it yet. I'm able to take those items and drag those down to people that are available to do it. In this case, well, Erwin's directly at Green. I don't really have anybody that doesn't have any work that can't, or capacity here. I think that's probably true in a lot of organizations. But you're able to take a look at this by whatever Zoom level you want. That is, whatever you want to do it monthly, weekly, whatever else you want. You're able to look at this in terms of not just hours, but in terms of percentages and things like that. And of course, I can set the time frame as well. But the key is, as a resource manager, I'm able to look at a list of named people and see that Adam is planned for 54 hours this week. I know that's not already. I know already that's not going to be done. Is there something I can do to move this work around in a way that makes more sense? This is then reflected back as a resource engagement in the project schedule. The project manager then is able to see, oh, I've planned time for Adam, but I see that the resource manager has moved this. Now, the process can be formalized in the system. I'm going to be very honest as a consultant. What we find routinely is that it is far better for people to pick up the phone and resolve these things by speaking to somebody else. That's not always possible in a highly automated environment where maybe your resource scheduler is sitting on top of 120 people. In that case, you do need an automated process. But in a lot of our environments, there's not that level of centralization. So, all right, awesome. At this point, we've kind of worked through the basics of 3 level of plans. We've seen the intake of ideas. And now I'm going to kind of step over real quickly to the outputs. People are often very interested in this. What do the reports look like? There are a huge variety of ways, again, to visualize data and information. A lot of times we start with these reports just because that's where people show the most interest. They want to see what they're going to get out of this. In this case, this is a project request dashboard. I am able to look at requests by priority, for example, just by clicking on this particular widget. I'm able to see them in a bubble chart, I'm able to see them in a bar chart, and I'm able to see them in a heat map. I can also come in and see this in a completely different way. If I just want to look at alignment and say, show me everything that's highly aligned, whatever that means, I'm able to do that. And I could see, again, down at the bottom, a list of everything that I'm looking at. Project portfolio status. Having put all that good information into our product and being able to say, look, how is this portfolio working? I now want to see this in a dashboard that makes a lot of sense to me. I want to see this in a way where I can come in and I can see a summary at the top level, and I can see my projects rolled into portfolios, and I can see graphically which ones I need to pay attention to. The information density that's possible on these reports is only limited by what you need. And we sell a starting pack that includes everything you're going to see here. These can all be modified either by you or by us. Doesn't make any difference. You're able to sort this by project type, for example, project owner, project manager, so forth. Timeline reports. If you have a funnel, we again have some nice visualizations kind of showing how these things come into the funnel, where they are in the stage, where they're going through, all the basics of being able to sort and sift. And then we're able to present this, of course, in a Gantt chart as well. Schedule status. Again, everything here is drills back down to core data. So if you have an executive that likes to start with a dashboard and drill down, they can do that. If you have analysts that want to look at this and drill backwards, they're able to do that. Financials. Again, you're able to kind of look at things in terms of total budget, total forecast, total actuals. This is only limited by the data that you need to configure. So what you see here should be taken as an example. Let's just move ahead to issues. So project issues as presented from across the system. So this is we're able to look at this by portfolio again or by project. But the key is that once you've started to work in an environment, program and portfolio management environment, you're able to see things from across the system and have them all in one place without having to go into individual items or look in individual file shares. Same for risks. We're able to look at risks in a more structured and systematic way and know what we should be paying attention to and what we should be mitigating and what we shouldn't be worried about. Changes, benefits, so forth. Project costs, people are generally interested in this. Not necessarily the most exciting visuals, but probably the most useful. What is my portfolio costing me against the various planning mechanisms that I have? What are my projects costing me, again, versus the various color-coded against the various planning mechanisms we have. This is simply kind of against versus actuals. And we're able to do some predictive work as well. We're able to look at this and say, how is this trending over time? Again, very important in terms of visualizations. What we talked about earlier is you have these multiple legitimate mechanisms for planning. You want to be able to consolidate those and compare those. This is usually the tool that we end up doing this in. Project status, individual projects. We are able to show individual project status reports. This is kind of a classic. Your basic health indicators, your basic information about the project itself, some graphical indicators showing progress, upcoming tasks, overdue tasks, active issues, active risks on a per project basis, a project description, a project status, and of course we support whatever custom field a project manager might want to include for narrative. Project schedule, I think this is the basics of what people like to see. Nice thing about this is, again, is that it's presented through a dashboard mechanism, so nobody needs to go into a different environment. They're able to see this all in one place and ask for exactly, or ask for and get exactly what they want. Resource planning for projects. Am I able to compare what is in the, we don't have very good data in this one, but am I able to compare what the resource manager has said versus what the project manager has planned versus the actual work? This is a vehicle for doing exactly that. The project manager themselves, when they're doing project planning, of course, can see it in their tools. But for people that maybe want to consolidate this or look at this at a top level, or if you just want to come into a room and say, look, we need to look at the different disparities between our two plans and figure out who needs to make a compromise, you're able to put this up on a whiteboard and do the analysis right on the spot. And then just various other things that I think you probably know are bread and butter of a project and portfolio management system. So finally, well, I'm not going to go to finally yet. I'm going to just briefly touch on resource capacity planning. Again, once this is consolidated in one place, we are able to look at the various different means of planning, including demand from projects. In this case, we've got a capacity line. It looks like we don't have any problems at all. That's usually not the case in most organizations. We're able to look at things like utilization. We're able to compare planned utilization depending on the type, again, project or resource capacity planning. We're able to look at resource availability over time. We're able to look at committed versus planned. And so forth, and we're able to look at resource assignments as well. Many different ways of visualizing what is largely the same data. It's going to, whether you use the reports out of the box or whether you tweak them slightly in your organization, you probably have processes that go do this, at least informally. What these tools do is highlight exactly what you should be talking about in a consistent way. Finally, timesheets. If you do start tracking time, you might want to say, what are the hours that various people have submitted versus are we in progress, are we approved, and you certainly want it by time frame. You might want to be asking compliance questions. Who is submitting their time? What managers are approving time like they should? Compliance by approver, are you really keeping up to date with what you need to? Billable versus non-billable work. In an internal organization, this might be chargeable versus non-chargeable work. Timesheets by specific projects, if that's what you want to do, if you want to support your project manager, if you want to support drill down, analysis of non-project time as well. All possible in kind of a visual dashboard environment that doesn't require the use or learning of a new tool. And all of these things, by the way, when you work with Power BI, as you can see we are here, convert very nicely into a mobile environment. So if you are out on any particular tablet or mobile device like a phone, there is a view available, depending on screen real estate, that would allow you to access this and then use it in an environment where you weren't having to sit in front of a desk with a mouse. So we worked through a lot in a short amount of time. We worked, like I said, all the way through intake and ideas, through the capital budgeting cycle, through a portfolio planning cycle, to a basic kind of project management, basic project management features. And it certainly didn't spend a lot of time talking about WBS planning, but we could just spend a whole day on that alone. We talked about capacity planning, supporting resource managers, and finally we showed how we wrap all this up in Power BI as a visual summary, highlighting areas that need additional focus. Real quick minute about Microsoft. We are a joint venture that was formed with Microsoft in 2002. We are a global company. We may be one of the biggest companies you've never heard of. We have a lot of people working inside Microsoft as well as across the world. And as you can see, we have multiple gold certified certifications. We offer various productivity solutions, typically focused on the Office 365 stack and project and portfolio management, but we do have a lot of resources across the Microsoft tool stack. You'll see, again, this bears calling out repeatedly because a lot of people tend to slip into thinking of the Agile tools as different or separate. We do work across all of them, and we do consolidate them into one central planning hub, as we think most organizations ultimately want to do. Next steps, we do provide a free assessment. We do provide a free online trial with Microsoft support. Probably most useful if you are interested is a one-on-one demo that puts us in a situation where you can ask questions and we can drill down on things that are interesting and gloss over things that are less interesting. You can email North American Sales, NA Sales at wickersoft.com. You can always email Jim Patterson with any complaints you might have. And you can email Mike Otranto with any compliments or nice things you might want to say about this webinar. Thank you. Our website, uswickersoft.com. We also do have a Project Online and Project Connect site if you're interested in how we integrate some of these systems. And we have a list of upcoming and on-demand webinars as well. With that, Mike. Well, Mike is not there. With that, that is the end of our webinar. Thank you very much for attending. I have appreciated your time.